rights, with the marriage equality debate and with all the rallies that happened, there was a lot of prejudice-motivated incidents, not crime. So there were things that were happening that didn't cross the line into becoming a criminal offence. There were offensive language or offensive posts that weren't criminal offences, but we were using that information, putting them into information reports to make sure we knew what was going on, we could possibly identify people that were making those posts.
Now, today on the podcast, we're here to talk about and to introduce Jen Dixon, who is the new LGBTI Community Portfolio Manager with VicPol. Jen, welcome to Joy 94.9.
Thanks, Dee. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Now, you're new to Joy and also to Victoria Police. You're an unsworn member. Does that mean that you are not actually a police officer?
That's correct. I'm not a police officer. I'm what's referred to as an unsworn. I'm a Victorian public servant, but I've actually been with Victoria Police for just over 2 years.
Oh.
So I came from another another division, and I've moved over to Priority Communities Division, which is part of Corporate Strategy and Operational Improvement Department. So
LGBTI is a priority community.
It is. So within priority communities, there's a number of portfolios that are all specialised in certain areas. So you've got experts in mental health and disability, LGBTI, human rights, Aboriginal, and so those particular portfolio managers have an expert, intimate knowledge of each community that they represent.
Today in the studio,
well, we've got Dani Houseman. Hi.
Hi, Dani.
It's great to be back. And one of our youth resource officers, Sophie Todorov.
Just this morning, we had a discussion around trans issues and the correct way to, address pronouns and all that kind of thing. How often do you have to be re-educated around language and making sure you understand language and how to refer to people? That's probably an open question to all of you, I would say.
I think it's an ongoing process. And one of the difficulties I know we face across the organisation is the ability to actually not only run training for our members across a range of issues, but also run it in a way where they're going to actually be able to attend. We rely quite heavily on what we call the Victoria Police Learning Hub. So it's an internal system that you can log into and do a whole lot of different training and educational activities on. And as part of that, we've actually got a news section that's available to members where, from the area that I work in, which is called Priority Communities Division, we represent we've got managers across 8 different portfolio or community groups. And we've actually started through a lot of our community stakeholders sourcing information that they're producing to put up onto that learning hub. So, for example, I know Minus 18 and Y Gender have recently produced the Trans 101 sort of information series. So we've got that up on the Learning Hub. So that's a place where our members, if they're not sure or they haven't done training for a while or they've never done training at all, that they can log in there and find out a little bit about what the contemporary language might be or the preferred language might be.
So does Victoria Police actively go out of their way to those particular organisations every so often just to connect and, ask them if things are changing or if there's different ways to, trying to better their resources and re-educating their members? Or do you?
Today we've got 2 special guests. We've got Sergeant Tanya Connolly, who's from our Family Violence Unit in Melbourne.
Hello.
And we've also got Sergeant Carolyn Beasley, who's a sergeant at our Melbourne West Police Station.
Fantastic, thank you.
And if we look at an LGBTI aspect of that, that might be the parents not accepting the gender identification or the sexual orientation of their child.
Yep.
And often you'll find children being kicked out of home, becoming homeless. If there's cultural or religious side to that, it might be that they have their religious leader come in to talk to the young person to try to, I guess, pray away the gay.
Yeah.
And we're seeing incidents like that becoming more prevalent, and that's something that police have to really look out for, and we weren't looking for those things before.
Yeah, I am Joy presenter Jason Gibbs, and here in the studio with me today, once again, we have LGBTI Liaison Officer Gabby Tyak, Sergeant Scott Davis back in the studio, and today we'd also like to welcome to the studio Sam Solomon, who is an instructor at the Police Academy and also LGBTI Student Network representative. Hello to you all.
There, when we were running the program previously, at all railway stations, I think I said police stations,
Yep.
PSOs at all railway stations, and more recently we've had police custody officers introduced, and we've got GLOWs in all of those roles.
We absolutely do have GLOWs who are PSOs and PCOs.
PCOs, yep.
Actually, that is quite interesting because I've never really made the connection. You see the PSOs there, and you can approach them if something's happening, but I've never really made the connection and kind of thought, what would they be like with LGBTI issues? So if there's a homophobic slur there or someone's someone's being made to feel uncomfortable about their sexuality at a train station, you can actually approach the PSOs and get some support with that.
And part of their role is educating the members that they work with about what the GLOW role is all about and what it's like to deal with people in our LGBTI communities that might be a little bit different from other parts of our community. So PSOs who are GLOWs are doing that within their own stations and within their own clusters, as they say.
What sort of events are the GLOWs at throughout the year?
May 17 is one of our major events that we recognise, and May 17 is also one of the events that we've been given permission from our Chief Commissioner to fly the rainbow flags on some of our police stations. We obviously have to have a certain number of flagpoles so we're able to change flags, but certainly the two main police buildings within Melbourne fly the rainbow flag during that day, and we have GLOWs attending local community events in relation to May 17. We have...
we've got the Police Academy. We fly the rainbow flag out the front.
Right.
And we also have a rainbow flag, which I think in length is about 5 metres.
Oh, wow.
And it hangs from the top level of our 4-storey main education building. So we hang that there for the week, as well as some bunting of rainbow flags across some of the balustrades and the like as well.
What was it that caused the formation of the Gay and Lesbian Police Employees Network?
Galpen formed in about 1995.
Speaking of Galpen, what have they done, or what do they do, I guess?
Galpen was a really interesting organisation. It had a fairly small group of perhaps 20 or so members who were very active, but being a network, it involved people that knew people that knew people. So even members of Galpen had no idea how many gay and lesbian members there were in the organisation. But it became highly political. Galpen had a disproportionate amount of influence because it managed to tap into the media. Gay cops tends to be a bit of a sexy story, and it provokes some really interesting emotive reactions, and so we were able to use that influence to provide stories to the media, and Galpen became, I think, a bit of a force to be reckoned with in its own right. But one of the first things we did was applied to the hierarchy in the organisation to attend a charity event, the Bobby Goldsmith Foundation. It was the Laird charity auction, and we appeared in uniform with a police motorbike, and we charged people $5 to have their photo taken with a cop in uniform on a motorbike, and we raised a lot of money. It so happened that at that event, someone took a photograph of all of us, and naively we all thought, that's great. But a week later it appeared on the front page of the Herald Sun saying gay cops is the force with them. And even though I was out to my immediate colleagues, this was plastered across the whole of the state. And that was really, I think, when an adversarial relationship began with Galpen and the organisation. There had been some incremental changes throughout the 90s. We'd had the establishment of an equity and diversity unit. We had our first pilot program involving a gay and lesbian liaison officer. A lot of people will remember Melinda Edwards, who did a magnificent job in that role, and she's now doing great work up in Darwin with the Northern Territory Police. So we'd had a few things that had happened, but the big watershed moment, the time when everything changed, was when Christine Nixon was appointed as Chief Commissioner. She commenced her tour of duty, I guess, doing a bit of a whirlwind tour of the state, asking police officers, how can we make things better? What would you like to improve? And we invited her to attend the Galpen annual general meeting. And she was the first commissioned officer to actually take up that invitation. And during that AGM, I asked her, would you let us march in Pride March in uniform? And she hesitated for about a nanosecond and said, I don't see why not. The follow-up question was, will you lead us in the march? And she said, ask me. So I said, will you lead us in the Pride March? And she didn't miss a beat, not even a nanosecond. Her very words were, I'd be honoured. And that was really...
The rest is history.
I was left a little bit out on a limb. I'd been this sort of passionate crusader, an anti-homophobia zealot, if you like. And what do you suddenly do when you've got everything you wanted, when you realise that David has beaten Goliath?
Surely, though, as a diversity inspector, you could continue for all the communities. I mean, you could be sort of a diversity inspector for all of them, not just the gay and lesbian community.
It makes a real difference when a sergeant, a senior sergeant or an inspector at your police station is openly gay, because it makes you feel very secure, and increasingly members are coming out and being very comfortable and open in their sexual orientation.
Welcome to the Glow Show. My first time, I'm Dylan Joel, and I'm joined by Glow, the Glow in Glow Show. She's brightening up our podcast. We have Gabby Tyak, and also joining us, we have Assistant Commissioner Stephen Fontana from Crime Command.
G'day.
Hello, welcome
Hey,
to the Glow Show. Today we'll be talking about Steve and his role as chair of the LGBTI reference group for the key stakeholders who meet quarterly. Who are some of those key stakeholders that meet as a part of your reference group?
Well, really, it's a broad range from the LGBTI community. We've got No to Violence, we've got Minus 18 Switchboard, transgender groups. So it's a really good cross-section from across the community, plus representatives from Victoria Police.
And how long have you been involved?
Since it started, I think we started we've got a number of portfolio reference groups within our what is it? I can't remember the name of the department. Seasword, we call it.
Priority Communities
Priority
Division?
Communities Division of Victoria Police.
Called Seasword.
Yes, so that's the name of the department.
We love acronyms.
Yes, we have all these acronyms.
What's it stand for?
Oh, you're putting him on the spot.
You put me on the spot because they're about to change it. So
if they're changing it, we won't bother about it. As long as we get the gist.
But we've got a number of areas within it that deal with our policy, and also we've got a Priorities Community Division there, and within that division there are a number of portfolio reference groups, and one of them's for LGBTI. We've got one for...
We're aware of these things happening, and we're aware that religion and ethnicity come into play when you're looking at LGBTI. They're bigger barriers to cross because you're dealing with the way people live their lives in other countries and live their lives through religion. So we're looking at those things through our Family Violence Command in relation to firstly identifying these things and then how do we appropriately respond and what services we can provide to them for assistance.
Now today we are speaking about beats, which is pretty new for me. I haven't had a chance to get on air at Joy, ironically, over 15 years and talk about beats. I don't know how I avoided it.
I know.
But really amazing topic to have a chat about. And to help us in the studio today, we have Senior Constable Amber Rawson from Footscray Police Station, as well as Michael Whelan, Health Educator at VAC, who is a familiar voice on Joy. How are you going?
Hello.
Very well. Thanks for being here. So, obvious question for those, and I think it's an obvious question for younger people because I don't think many young people will actually know what a beat is. So, who would like to explain it for me?
They certainly do know what beats
Do they?
are. Yeah, they
Right.
certainly do.
Well, that might be a misconception then, because I would just assume that a lot of young people have their apps and then they just know if they want to hook up with someone, it's quite convenient, but not necessarily to an organised area.
Not necessarily.
Right.
And oftentimes the two sort of go hand in hand. So a beat is basically that they're anywhere and everywhere. They're anywhere guys go to meet other guys, either to hook up or just to meet and take their business elsewhere.
Right.
And a lot of young people use beats now in conjunction with other apps. So they'll get on their Scruff, they'll get on their Grindr at their local park or at the pool or wherever they're at and sort of pre-arranged beat hookups.
Right.
So it's sort of like another step from, just hooking up with that guy and getting him to come over to your place. If perchance you're someone that, can't host people at your house or your flatmates knowing or your partner knowing or your whatever, you can pop down to the local beat and then that's where all of that takes place and then you pop off home.
Right.
And so they had to find places to meet other men, and so public places became beats, like parks or...
Amazing.
And now toilet blocks are quite popular too. It was a criminal offence in Victoria, so the criminal offence was soliciting, loitering or accosting for homosexual purposes.
Right.
Which is an interesting way to say it. But that's under the Summary Offences Act, and it was decriminalised in 1981, so no longer an offence.
Sure. It's fascinating. Because, I wouldn't have even known. I would have just assumed that any public sexual contact would be illegal, regardless, full stop.
Well, you've got to look at how we word the law.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're having sex in a public place, it can be illegal, but we have to be able to, I guess it depends on the circumstances and the location. So certainly if you're in the local park in the middle of the day, right out in the open having sex,
Sure, yep.
certainly would be an offence if someone could see or hear you having that sexual activity.
Yeah.
But then again, I guess if you were in that same park at midnight over in the corner behind a bush, that's not an offence because people aren't walking through there and likely to see you.
And a little bit different to being somewhere, rush hour in a train station where
Exactly.
anyone can walk through the doors and a little bit of a different situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're in the middle of rush hour in a public train station, but you're behind a closed, locked toilet door where no one can see sort of over and under without sort of having to go to extreme lengths to view it, still not an offence.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's all about what's within view and what's not.
So many things to try, so little time.
Them because they think that they will be charged with the offence that they may have been committing of having sex in a public place. And we can certainly say that if police respond to an offence at a beat location, we're not looking at the sexual activity that's occurred. We're looking at what's happened against the beat user, because usually, like I said, they're very serious offences, and sex in a public place is a minor offence.
Yeah.
So we've just got to make it clear to people using beat that police responding won't look at the sexual behaviour that may have occurred as something that we're going to investigate.
How are officers trained to understand how to handle situations like that? Because I could imagine that for some officers, and especially officers that are not connected to the LGBTI community, that it could be a very confronting thing if you're faced with that for the first time.
Well, Amber, maybe you can answer that question.
And it is quite confronting for some members, but we are guided via VPMs, so Victorian Police Manual, which outlines how to police beat locations, and that's available for every member to read, and it's quite succinct and quite easy to follow. So it's there if you want to read up about it.
Do you also generally a community, and do you see will we always win the war against this right wing? Do you think it's just something that's passing in our politics?